Thanks for tuning into another talk here at the Product-Led Festival. Hope you're enjoying the event so far, because we've got even more juicy knowledge and insights from product-led pioneers heading your way. Remember to have your questions ready and get the tailored answers you need from the experts themselves. Sit back and enjoy. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the next session at the Product-Led Festival. We are about to kick off our first panel, which is going to look at prioritization. We've got an absolutely stellar lineup of presenters joining us on the virtual stage now. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jason Knight, who's the Director of Product Management from Dudil and also the host of fantastic podcast, One Night in Product. He's going to be joined by Giorgio Baglioni of Starling Bank, Maggie Crowley of Drift, and Tosin Adeniji of Verizon Media and Yahoo Sports. So without further ado, Jason, take it away.
Thank you. You've taken away all of my intro as well, because I was about to do all of that, but that's okay. I'll sing a song or something like that. Thanks for coming, everyone. So we'll just do a little bit of housekeeping up front. So we're going to talk for about 40 minutes, just have a little bit of a chat around some of the different topics around prioritization, and then we're going to crack into some questions. So if you want to put any questions into the chat, I mean, you're all muted, so it'll have to be in the chat, I'm afraid, but unless there's anything completely urgent, what we'll do is we'll try and answer those at the end. But feel free to put those in as you have questions as the talk progresses. The subject, as Heather said, of the panel is all around prioritization. And obviously prioritization is one of the most important things that a functioning product team can do. It's one of our core jobs to be able to go out there and say with confidence that we're putting out the most valuable, most important things and not getting distracted by just anything. But it's also really tough, and there's quite a lot of content out there that you've all seen it. There's a lot of content around, for probably about 1 million articles go out on Medium every day, all saying different things. They're all telling you this that you should do, this that you shouldn't do, this framework you can use, this framework you shouldn't use. Just say no, don't just say no. So it's a bit of a mess out there, and I'm actually really happy to participate here and have some excellent product people joining me to talk a bit about what they do in their various companies and understand a little bit and try and work out, try and sort the wheat from the chaff and give you some really good insight into some really proactive and decent ways to prioritize. So introduction wise, as Heather's already said, I'm Jason. I'm a product director at Dudil. So we're a RegTech company based in London, working with a lot of banks and financial service providers. And also by night, I run this little podcast. Feel free to go and listen to Heather's episode after this, or after all of the other talks tonight, where you can hear her tell tale of how she started the Product-Led Alliance. We've also got Maggie, who is the Senior Director of Product Management at Drift. So they're a conversational marketing platform based, I believe, out of Boston, or at least Maggie is. Tosin, who's the principal product manager for Yahoo Sports, so part of Verizon Media, based out in San Francisco. And Giorgio Baglioni, product manager at Starling Bank, company very interesting to me, of course, being a fintech, but also a challenger bank in the UK that's making waves. So hello, everyone.
Hey, Jason.
There's Giorgio. There's
Hello.
Maggie. And hopefully, we should find Tosin. We'll give Tosin. Oh, Tosin's had enough of my intro and decided to leave, but that's okay. We'll hope she comes back. But before we crack into it, I think it would be really interesting to understand a little bit more. Tosin's back. Are you with us, Tosin? Okay, let's crack on with the intro. So, Giorgio, it'd be really good to understand. Pick on you to start with the types of product or products that you're looking after for Starling, how that fits within your organization, and who your users are.
Sure, sounds good. So hi everyone, my name is Giorgio. I'm a product manager at Starling Bank based in London. As Jason said, we are a challenger bank of fintech. We offer bank accounts to basically retail customers like you and I, as well as business customers, so small SMEs, small medium-sized companies. And yeah, in Starling Bank, I kind of focus on the user engagement side. So helping new users get started and onboard with us, all the way through to make them full Starling customers and make us their main bank account. In terms of, what was the last question, Jason? It was around, sorry, what's the last bit?
Yeah, so I mean, so you're working on user engagement. I guess the question would be, do you cover then across both the business accounts and the consumer users, or do you very much focus on one or the other? Because obviously they both have very different implications for potential prioritization decisions and where your requests might come from.
Yeah, definitely. So Starling's product team is still quite small. So we tend to cover around both, but have experts who work on SME side, on the business side, and then experts for the retail side. So we kind of work across each area based on that. Yeah.
Excellent. How about you, Maggie?
Sure. So like you mentioned, Drift is a sales and marketing platform. We work primarily in B2B. So the customer that I work with, I run our marketer facing products. So I work with marketing teams and helping them, understand who's on their websites and help qualify them. So where our feature requests are coming from, typically, directly from customers. We also have a big customer success team. And then of course from internal stakeholders like sales as well.
Excellent. And Tosin, how does your product look, and who are you serving? Which users are you serving?
Yeah, sure. So I work in Yahoo Sports currently, which is a standalone product, as well as a website, and it's a part of the Verizon Media house of brands. So many people know Yahoo, so I won't go into explain what that is, but we are still around. And what I currently work on, I'm the iOS app lead, as well as the main product lead for any kind of new innovative experiences. So that's everything from AR, VR, and 360 content, and how we can leverage those to create new sports experiences. And so our user base is generally everyone, because anyone can go to the App Store and download Yahoo Sports and experience all the different features that we have, or alternatively log on to yahoosports.com. So yeah.
So let's just jump straight actually to my next question. So Tosin, obviously you said that, as you literally just said, that anyone can come and download your app, right? So does that mean that all of your users are effectively inbound, or do you have any outbound at all? Is it all literally product-led growth? They have an app, they sign up, they viral the hell out of it and send it to as many people as they can?
Yeah, so we tend to have majority just users that come to the App Store, download the app. We obviously do some marketing and some growth around that, and try to leverage specific tent poles in the sporting calendar. So NFL is one of our biggest drivers. We also tend to have a lot of partnerships. So you may, over the years, see Yahoo Sports partner with someone. In the past, we've done things with NHL, which then brings their user base over to our app and to look at our features. But yeah, mainly just folks that are just looking around for where can they find sports content.
So you've got effectively then the consumers that are coming in and obviously consuming the content, and there could be feature requests coming in from those people, which may have an impact on your planning. But you've also got, for example, as you said, sports calendars. Now, sports calendars are the most waterfall things in the world, right? There's a date that you're going to hit, and you have to hit that date. And it feels like you're going to get prioritization requests and feature requests and enhancement requests, not just from the users, but also from those sponsors and sporting events and stuff like that. Does that kind of then lead you to this weird hybrid model where you've got your presumably very thematic roadmap that you want to stick to, but you've also got these really hard dates? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, it's very difficult, especially last year where everything just collapsed in terms of sports. So my roadmap went out of the window. Olympics didn't happen, March Madness didn't happen, etc. So it definitely is hard to follow along the last year or so. But generally, we tend to have specific dates. Premier League starts at a certain date, basketball starts on a certain date, and we have to hit those dates. But the other side of the roadmap is like product feature requests that maybe a user has given us. We get so many comments and feedback every day. And then the third level is actually just our higher priority company strategies as a company within Verizon, which is basically telecom and internet and network. There are like higher level priorities that I always have to consider. So the buzzword in our company is 5G, of course. So we always have to think about 5G experiences, as well as when is NFL starting, as well as what do our user base want. So it's a layered approach at all times.
I see 5G becoming much more widespread with all these vaccines as well, which is obviously fantastic. So Maggie, your firm are obviously, as you say, B2B, and I had a poke around on your site earlier, and you've got your very, very on-trend product-led growth, sign up, get your trial, do all that stuff. But then you've also got the enterprise, pound, pound, dollar, call us for more details. So that supposes then you've got some kind of sales team that you and then like an enterprise account manager type team that would be looking after these people and working directly with building relationships with them. Do you operate both of those models, or as in kind of a very product led inbound low touch plus the enterprise, or is everyone kind of high touch?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because there's an answer on how we drive business, and then there's a different answer for how we decide what we're building. I think it's sort of easy to say, oh, well, if you're product led growth, you don't have a big sales team, but if you have a big sales team, you're sales led. But even though we do have a huge sales team, and part of the product that we build is for sales teams, the way that we think about what we're building is not like what's the sales team asking for, right? Like we probably use more of a consumer mindset for how we think about what we're building, but we are still working with the sales team. They're just one of the inputs that we have into the thing that we're building. So I think the motion that's different, having worked in, B2C and B2B, is when we go to do something, you get to have another round of feedback that is, hey, sales team, I did this morning. I sat down with some sales directors, showed an example of what a roadmap would be, and got some feedback on, what's landing, what's not landing, what do they like, what do they don't like, what are they hearing, what am I missing, just as another input. And I think it actually makes prioritizing as someone in B2B a little easier than consumer, because the people who I need to talk to are more accessible. Toast, and I imagine it's like, everyone can use your product, but then it's like, who do you go to for user research is more challenging than like, hey, I have these 10 paying customers over here. I can just go call on the phone.
And Giorgio, obviously yourself working for a bank, you've got business users, you've got consumer users, but you've also, and I'm pretty sure that you have this because this is my area as well, is you've also got kind of regulatory requirements. You've got banking authority. I'm assuming that there's external pressure coming from not just your users to get things built to make sure that you satisfy certain requirements. Does that happen quite a lot? And is that constant, or is that just every now and then?
Yeah, I think so. We have like high value aims of where we want to get to, what we have on our backlog. But then, as you say, the government might come out with new regulations to implement stuff. And we have to be kind of flexible on both regulatory systems, but also security requests. We'll probably get a couple a year, but it's not usually, hey, this has to be done within a week. They usually give us a couple of months. I think one of the advantages of Starling Bank and a few of the other newer challenger banks in the UK and around the world really is that the technology has been built recently, and in a way which allows us to really scale and add new features very quickly. So when the government does come in with a new change, we're able to respond to that in a lot less time than other banks might need to. So because of that, we get a pretty good amount of notice, but definitely does require a little bit of a change to the roadmaps. For sure.
So you've all touched on it a little bit so far in different ways. Like obviously you all work for very different businesses, but you've all basically raised the specter of stuff happening that you weren't originally expecting, and how you fit that in, which is obviously the nightmare of any product manager, because you don't want to sit there. You sit there, you craft your plan, you've got your OKRs, everything's looking good, you're on target. It's like the end of the Star Wars. You're just about to fire the missile, and then Darth Vader flies in from the side, knocks you off course. This is an open question to any of you. Like, how do you handle that? Like, it's really easy, for example, and you see it online all the time. Hey, just say no. So, well, that's brilliant. But I'm assuming, for example, Maggie, that if you say no to one of your biggest customers, they're not going to like that very much. Doesn't mean you should say yes, but at the same time, how does that work when someone throws you off course that you can't just say no to?
I think, for me at least, the thing that matters most is understanding your why or your mission for a given quarter or time period. I think if you're really clear on what you're trying to get done and why, then it's very easy to say yes or no to something because you know what game you're playing, right? But if that changes, I think that's when it gets really interesting. So I actually did this last quarter in Q4 of last year. We had finished planning. We had finished it. We were a month into our quarter, and I was the one who said, we actually need to change what we're doing. And a bunch of teams need to switch up what they're doing because something has changed. And the burden I put on myself was, how do I communicate the why that is so compelling that everyone understands? And like, even though they don't like it, I didn't like doing it, but even though we didn't want to do it, we all knew that it was the most important thing. And so I think if you're going to be the person who's going to make that call, like, you're accountable for telling a story that's compelling enough and sharing the why behind it in a way that the teams can understand, because you're right. It's the absolute worst to go through all of the work it takes to figure out what you're doing, and then to just have someone show up and be like, just kidding, you got to switch it up.
What about any other tales from other part from you, Giorgio, or Tosin, on that? Any similar scenarios?
I was just going to say, for us, as I mentioned, we are building a product for everyone, which means that there is hundreds, if not thousands, probably, of different sports that we could cover and that we could really cater our features around. And one thing that I have to tend to do to, like, maybe an engineer who really loves cricket, but we're not going to focus on cricket, is I have to tell them and explain to zoom out and look at who we are trying to get and who is the majority. So we're always going to miss the mark on someone. If you look at our cricket content versus our NBA content, it's night and day. And unfortunately, that is part of the story that I have to tell, where it's not nice to say, hey, I know you're super passionate about this, or I know we said we was going to do this, but the home run is really over there. And so we have to focus on that. It's a tough one to have, even to users as well. But it's something that I guess is part of the parcel when you do have to cater to a larger majority.
Yeah, I guess one interesting thing is that all makes sense, but sometimes the people that push back most against those types of things can be the dreaded hippos, right? So you've got the person who comes in, the CEO, or you get some senior stakeholder, the VP of sales, who says, if you do this, if you put cricket in, Tosin, then we're going to sell X million, whatever. And it's all, yeah. But I imagine that number was very much sort of written down on the back of a napkin and kind of like not necessarily backed up. But at the same time, I read a really interesting article by Rich Miranoff that said we should not be surprised when the sales teams that we hire to go and be very persuasive to other people go and then turn that power inwards onto our own executive team and start to sell the basically the benefits of whatever it is that they want, and then get you overridden. Have any of you been overridden by the highest paid person in the room, or at least heavily encouraged to work in a certain area and encouraged to do that to your benefit? Or have you always managed to hold that line? Because I feel that line is always, it's that kind of line in the sand that we all say that we want to hold, but in real life, does that always happen?
Yeah, I mean, having a very large sales team, I can take a crack at this one. I think that, again, I feel like I'm going to sound like a broken record here. The thing that I always come back to is like, what did we say mattered, and what did we say was going to be the biggest opportunity to get us there, and has that changed? Because there's always I was just on a phone call with this huge account. They're going to be a beachhead into this new market, and we got to get this integration or whatever it is, and that's going to happen all the time. And so I think a lot about the product role is like, how do you have a strong center of gravity around the thing that matters most? And how do you have conviction? And then how do you make sure that you have a conversation with those people? So it's like, great, tell me what data you have. Tell me what happened on the phone. Let me share back like why I'm working on this thing and like why we picked these other things and why we think this happens. But then I think like there's a lot of conversation that happens on how you do that well and how you hold the line, like you're saying. I think you also have to be open to being wrong. Like sometimes the idea is the right one. And then I think it almost gets harder to know when is it the right time to decide that, hey, actually, I got this wrong and this person has different information that's better, because we're so used to being like, no, I have to just convince them that I was right and that they, I have to stay on the course with this roadmap and whatever. So I think a lot about how to have the like emotional fortitude to admit that I was wrong and to change things based on what they're bringing up.
Yeah, that's the old psychological safety, right? The fact that you're not supposed to just, it can be really tough to just sit there and say you were wrong. But at the same time, if you can't say that, then you're going to have a lot more trouble than just a particular feature. But Giorgio, you're working for a fairly new kind of very technically savvy, up and coming challenger bank. You've got not a lot of legacy behind you, so it feels like your company should be pretty good at this stuff, right? Because you don't have all of that. But at the same time, I imagine the people that started your company came from maybe more traditional banking backgrounds. Mm-hmm. So do you feel that there's some of that thinking there, or is it very kind of startup-y and everyone's on the same page?
Definitely. So what's interesting about Starling is that in 2019, we won about £100 million to create business banking, basically. And to create a new competition. There's a new competition in the UK for different banks to take some money and build different features to help small businesses. And as part of that, we sort of had to agree to certain feature sets. And, these were agreed in 2018, 2019. So things change over time. And on top of that, we also have investors. And as you say, our exec board, although we're in a, kind of a new fintech company, it still is people's legacy kind of backgrounds. And so a lot of times we do still get pressure from above to create something. For example, business cards for businesses, or someone might want a way of spending for somebody else, so you can spend from my account. And in times like this, it's okay. It's on the roadmap. We know we're going to have to get to this stage at some point. We've already committed to this, but it doesn't have to be right now necessarily. And the thought is, how can we repurpose some of these agreed features? And a good example is at the start of the pandemic last year, which is actually 1 year to this day in the United Kingdom when we went into lockdown. Lucky us. Ever since then, at the beginning, what happened was people were told to stay at home. And if you were over a certain age or had medical disabilities or anything, stay at home as well. And so these people then had the problem of they had strangers or volunteers coming over and saying, hey, we can go shop for you. So then people who are isolating would have to give out their debit card and their PIN number. And this lends itself to financial crime and fraud. So we sort of thought, okay, we know long-term where we want to get to with some form of card you can shop with, maybe an expense card. Is there something we can do now? So we built a product called a connected card, which basically gives you, Jason, an extra bank card. And you can then hand that to your shopper, and it points to just a separate small amount of money, which you can control. You have full visibility. So it just helps reduce the fraud, helps reduce this, but still helps Starling get the infrastructure in place for later down the line. So it's kind of trying to wait, okay, we don't want to necessarily build this exact thing, but can we get ourselves on the right route for what we want to get to?
So the TLDR there is that it's okay. it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to change direction, but it has to be from the right place. And I think actually that point about the cards and like building something that wasn't what you expected, but it pushes you in a different direction as well is actually a really interesting one, because it means that as long as you're looking through these random things and looking at them properly and not just doing them because someone said, but actually doing a proper evaluation and understanding what that might unlock for your business, then that could be a positive thing, I guess, is to summarize some of that stuff. But obviously a lot of this then begs the question, like, how do you actually prioritize? So for example, I saw a question which we'll get to properly in a bit about, for example, the RICE framework. There's obviously all these other different types of framework that you can use. There's like the benefit versus cost, or effort versus value. And I remember once in my last job, I tried to come up with some even more complicated model than RICE, which had loads of extra letters on it, and half of them seemed to cancel each other out. So I jumped that one again. But like, do you all do it very data driven and very analytically, or is it very much as in like feature by feature, or do you have like buckets of strategic areas that you try and fill up, or do you have like a portfolio where you sit there and say, well, actually, yeah, we're going to do a bit of tech there, and we're going to do a bit of new feature development, and we're going to do a bit of maintenance or whatever? How does that work? Open question really to anyone.
Yeah, I can just share a bit how we do it. So we're very constrained because of the sporting calendar, so it does make it a little different. We don't do weighting or the RICE formula. We tend to look at themes, and the themes tend to be around the sports. And then we also look at just longer line priorities. So like 5G is one of our biggest one. So we're always thinking about how to create sporting experiences that can contain some sort of 5G element. But generally it's thematic buckets. And then we ladder up and think about the feature sets that are not to be too sports specific, but like home runs and big bets, and then the smaller, like, wins that we can get. So it is very much like that. And there tend to be things that we just have to do every year, like turn on certain things because certain sports are coming back. So that tends to be the way that we do it. But I think that's also because working in Yahoo Sports, it's an established product. It's been around for maybe 10 plus years. But when I've worked on other projects that are net new, it has been much more data driven. What effort can we put in versus what value are we getting out? So I think it depends on where the product is in the life cycle and just what type of users, and then we apply different tactics.
Is there any concept of an MVP in your world, though? I mean, it seems like if you're pushing this stuff out to as many people as possible, then, I mean, I guess on the one hand, that gives you the ability to slice and dice bits of audience, for example, and push them new features in that kind of typical, Facebook change their button color or whatever. But do you get to do a lot of that stuff to help you make those decisions, or does it have to be kind of one step back from that?
We tend to do some of that, maybe for like not the top 4 sports, American sports at least, because that's where we can like test out new audiences and see what they're reacting to. But with the top 4 sports, it's usually like GA to everyone because someone's going to notice that they haven't got a certain feature. So it does cause a lot of late nights and early mornings because of that. But at least with the rest of the sports world, we can test and experiment a lot more.
Okay, yeah, curling and dodgeball and stuff like that. But from a marketing platform perspective, Maggie, it feels like this is something that integrates very tightly with people's back-end systems, right? So they're relying on this stuff. And having worked on similar kind of back office tools in the past, it feels like they're the last people that are going to want to be experimented on. Would you say that's fair to say, or do you get to do a bit of that as well?
Yeah, that's very fair to say. I mean, I think if you're building for the enterprise and you're building a B2B tool, you can't A/B test a workflow that they've trained their team on. Like, it's just a different motion, and you just can't. They have different requirements of you, and so you can't just be sort of like fast and loose trying stuff out. Which is interesting when you're a startup and you're went back in the early days of Drift. When we were still searching for our product market fit, how to do that in a B2B setting is really interesting. And the way we did it is we just built lots of different sort of we like to use the simple, lovable, complete, not the MVP framework, although it's quite similar. We built a lot of these sort of version ones of things to understand what people would want to use and how they were going to get value. And now that we've done that, now we're thinking about, okay, we know what our customers love, how we create value, and how do we grow up that product. So I think our prioritization has gone from like, let's test out all these different ideas to, okay, we know the ideas we like, and now how do we move those forward? So we've shifted from sort of a more anecdotal method to a portfolio thing where we have our core products, we have some strategic bets we're making, we allocate risk, we like define the size of the bet we want to make, and then within those bets, that's when we start to think about prioritization. But I'm honor bound to say that I don't believe in the math frameworks for this. I just don't think that I every time I've seen a PM use them, I think what it does is it takes away your, like, it makes a hard, complex problem easy, and it abstracts away like the bet nature of it and how you're never going to actually know the right answer, and you have to be comfortable making a bet on something. And so the way I think about it again is like, I think Tosin, you mentioned this, how much value are we going to get? How much is an opportunity worth to us? And how long do we want to give ourselves to work on it? And then we kind of use that as an input. That's the closest I usually get to the math part of it, at least on my teams.
I imagine banks are pretty mathematical there, Georgia.
To be honest, I have to agree here, actually. I don't think we really use Rice framework or anything formally anyway. We always think about, okay, what's the impact versus the cost, but we aren't overanalyzing everything else. I think the one thing we do is we do have kind of buckets or themes of, okay, we're a bank, we want to do lending, we're growing, so we want to be able to scale our customer service as we grow without losing any of the quality and things. And so by looking at that, it's how can we get more people to self-serve? How can we get, to reduce the amount of contact into Starling? And when you look at those, you do have ticket categories. So okay, people are getting in touch because of this problem. And then you can actually speak with those customers, understand what are they trying to do, get a bit more information, and then try and solve that problem based on that. So it gives you like a high level thing. So mathematically, that's probably the most we do in that sense.
Do you find then that you allocate a certain percentage of your time or your team's time to fixing stuff like that? So you've got loads of users, and I guess Tosin's going to have the same thing with the multitude of sports users that are coming back with either bugs, like blocking bugs and things that are just stopping them doing anything, versus feature enhancements and nice to haves, and then just completely wacky stuff that you just ignore. But like, do you find yourself having to manage it on that level where you say, okay, well, I'm going to apportion, 15% of my time to fix bugs if we have that amount of bugs, or is it very dynamic based on just what's in front of you at the time?
I think because we're a bank, we're very highly regulated. And so if bugs are found in the app, we actually treat them as an engineering incident. So basically the entire team working on it will stop whatever they're doing. And it usually involves maybe the CTO or someone getting involved, or the tech lead for that area. And completely everyone just works to figure out the problem and get a release out straight away. So bugs are kind of handled kind of differently. And because of doing it that way, we don't get too buggy of a platform. And it also has to go through a lot of QA testing before it can go out. Yeah.
Well, fair enough. Another interesting point around prioritization is once we've actually decided what we're going to prioritize, we have to sell that into the business as well, right? So we actually have to get then, I think Maggie, you touched on it earlier, you have to get that alignment, you have to get the buy-in. If people disagree with it, you have to at least get them to go along with it, even if they didn't really want you to do that. I guess one question there is that easy for you to do? Does everyone just accept based on the data that you show them and the evidence that you give them? Or do you still get people throwing their hands up in the air saying, but I really wanted that?
I mean, yes, all of the above. I think the thing that has helped me on this in the past, and I think this is another one of those things that like part of the PM job is like just telling the same story over and over again, a million times to a million people. And you just have to like accept that that's probably what you're going to be doing for some part of time. But I think for me, I always try to make a little story out of everything I'm working on and give everything a tagline, because that makes it easy for people to remember like what you're doing, why, and have like a little phrase. So never like V2 whatever, but like name your feature. And if you do that and you have a little story, it makes it a little bit easier for everyone to grab onto that and remember it. Because I think what happens is people forget, right? So just try to make it easier for your stakeholders to remember what you're doing and why, and then that can make your life a little easier when you're doing that.
Yeah, I remember once and recently, in fact, reviving it, the old conversation or the old phrase. If you haven't got bored saying it, then you've not said it enough. You have to just keep saying it and saying it and saying it. And I think also just making sure that you really, really explicit around what you're not doing. So, like one thing that story I was saying the other day is like, especially in Britain, with British people, we're all very polite. And we all speak in the passive voice quite a lot, and it's very easy for people to go away from a conversation thinking that they've just agreed something when actually you didn't. So being really explicit can be really helpful. And kind of around the table question then, just because I'm interested, is have there ever been any situations either where you've prioritized something based on whatever method or framework you decided at the time, and you sat there and you were convinced this was the right decision, or alternatively that you weren't convinced it was the right decision, but it was just something that you were forced to override, and that went either really badly. Yeah, let's stick to badly, like a bad prioritization decision. Sometimes when you looked at it after and you go, "Whew, I should not have done that." Have you got any sort of tales from the front on that one? Anyone?
Doesn't you have one? I could admit my shame.
I mean, we try a lot of things and a lot of things don't work. So I'm trying to think of one specific thing. I can't think of one recent one, but I think it's okay if something doesn't work and you try it, whether it came from myself or it came from above executive. I think it's okay. I tend to not put the whole team on it. That's the difference. I try to just protect a small point of resource and just focus on that. And if it doesn't work, at least we didn't have the whole team. So yeah, but I can't think of anything specific right now.
I've done a bad one. I can admit the thing I did. I had like the opposite version, which is we were working on something and I probably wasn't as bought into it as I think I should have been. And it was a whole team that was working on it. And then we had an executive who said, why are you working on that? Like, go work on this other thing. And I was like, great, we'll go work on the other thing. And I switched what the team was working on sort of mid go. And I don't even really have enough data to say whether or not that was the right choice at the time. But I think the thing I didn't do well enough was like stick to the story and understand the reasons behind decisions. And I probably moved too quickly. And I think that's part of this thing is like understanding when to move, when not to move, when to wait, and when you have enough data. And I think I got a couple of those things wrong. And everyone was annoyed on all sides. I don't think that anyone was happy with what happened. So one cautionary tale.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's always interesting. I think actually Toastin's point was really, really valid. It's like it should be okay for things not to go well from time to time. I mean, you don't want things to not go well all the time because that could be problematic in a different way. But I think as long as you learn something from every single, I mean, that's the whole point of lean and testing and learning and actually doing these experiments, right, is to actually be able to move forward and say, okay, yeah, fine. To your point, Maggie, I'm not going to do that again. So, that's a good thing. I know that we're getting on a bit in time and there are a few questions. Some of the questions that have come in may be not so relevant because we've all said that we don't do, for example, value versus cost prioritization. I mean, have any of us ever tried? I mean, I've certainly tried it. It didn't last very long. I think from my perspective, it always feels like half the things, like the inputs are often subjective. So, for example, the value of something is such a subjective thing because unless you actually put a dollar amount on it, then it is very much just the person's opinion who said that thing, and that's so vulnerable to recency bias that it becomes quite difficult to actually do that. But have any of you ever tried and stopped using either value v cost or any other types of frameworks, or have you always just never done them?
At the very beginning, when I first joined Starling, we tried to do, we attempted some different frameworks, mainly Rice. What we kind of found pretty quickly was things changed so much, and what we had to build changed. So we would start down one path, and then a regulatory thing would come in, and we'd just move off Rice. And so the backlog just kept moving so much, it wasn't really worth spending that much time thinking, okay, let me spend a week prioritizing this perfectly, and then things all went out the window. And so, yeah, we kind of now sort of think about it. Basically, we have these high-level buckets we want to go into, and then we have what are we working on now, and what's the next thing? Well, that next thing could very much swap out any minute. But at the moment, the company's kind of focused on these things. If there's a bit of downtime, or you're waiting on back-end or front-end work, the other team can pick up some stuff, clean up technical debt, things along those lines. But it's much more thinking, what are we doing right now? What's our next thing, and how does that align to the company's values?
Yeah, I agree. Any thoughts around prioritization frameworks or formulas best suited? It sounds like a very similar question, like frameworks for SaaS startups. I mean, I guess when you're really starting up, like to Maggie's point, when you're picking up actually trying to work out product market fit, is that too early for a framework, would we say? I mean, none of us seem to use frameworks anyway, but would that especially be too early for a framework, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll take a strong point of view on this. Like, you're never going to be as certain as that formula is going to make it seem. And I think that's my problem with it, right? Is that, okay, great, your formula said this, but like, go talk to 10 customers. Like, how does your formula stand up to that? Like, how does it, I think, Giorgio, to your point, it doesn't evolve fast enough, especially early stage. Like, early stage is so dangerous, I think, to use that, because you're going to get blind to the inputs that you need when you're building. So I really wouldn't use one. And again, I think it's just like, it just makes the job too easy. And I would be skeptical of anything that makes the PM job like too straightforward.
Yeah, it's almost like prioritization, literally prioritization by numbers, like something out of a child's book. Maybe not quite like that, but it feels that you need. It's this whole then argument around sort of data-driven versus data-led as well, right? Like, if it was as easy as just putting loads of numbers in a box and turning the handle, and then your next piece of work comes out, it starts to almost feel a little bit like a feature factory as well. Because if you're just going to put a value on every single feature and work them in that order, you're losing that subtlety of the actual bigger, wider context of things that you're supposed to be working on. How best to prioritize features or enhance? This is one for you, I think, Tosin. How to best prioritize features or enhancements based on campaign start date? So if we assume that a campaign is, for example, the beginning of the new football season or something like that, I mean, what do you do? I mean, you obviously have to hit the date, because that's when it happens, and it's all going to go wrong if you don't hit the date. But how do you get to that date effectively?
Yeah, first of all, there are a lot of campaigns and things that come our way, and sometimes I look at it and look at what the sales team has used to pitch and say, that's not possible. And so first of all, let's just agree and align on what we can do with a good enough time to actually QA, develop, etc., everything. So once we do have a date in mind, like last year, I think around this time, we decided we're going to do a partnership with the NFL, and that gives us a good 5-month run out. I tend to start to put the regular meetings in, so that even if I don't have as much information, or information is being fed as we're going along, which often happens, at least the team is together, they start to understand what we're going to build and so forth. But eventually it gets to crunch time, and working with partners, it does mean there's approval processes that we have to factor in. So if the project is getting way too big, I start to work with a program manager or a product ops lead, so that they can handle the Gantt charts and stuff while I actually figure out, what are we building and how are we going to build it. And sometimes it doesn't meet the spec. we start deprioritizing. So that's a part of prioritizing too, saying that we're not going to do this and we're going to fast follow on this later. So there's a lot of compromises and back and forth and quick decisions that you have to make, especially when it comes to a campaign.
Yeah, I mean, Maggie, from your side, obviously you're enabling campaigns, but do you have any of those external factors from your side, or are you not really that vulnerable to that?
Yeah, not as much. I mean, I think we definitely have. I think the most analogous thing for us would be if a customer is really needs something that we've said we're working on or that's in our roadmap, and then I had a customer last year who we were using for research, and their use case was exactly what we wanted to do. They were a huge customer. It was one of those perfect things where it's okay, we're going to build this for you, but also for everybody else. And the use cases was the same. And this customer, she was incredible. And she just kind of tricked us, a group of PMs. She tricked us into committing to a date, a hard date. And she sent us an invite on our calendar for that date. It was amazing. On this day, we're going to get back on the phone. You're going to turn it on. And we all left the meeting and we were like, how did that happen? And we hit the date. I will admit we did hit it. But that was one of the only times that we've had a very explicit external date, because of course, we use dates all the time internally, but as everyone knows, it's hard to predict unless you've done a ton of scoping that you're actually gonna be able to hit that. So we tend not to have that problem. Yeah,
and Giorgio, you're going to have the regulatory thing at the very least, right? I mean, and those tend to be immovable as well, right? You have a date that you have to be compliant to something, or at least be shown to be working heavily towards being compliant. So do you have any strategies to get there, or is it just just throw everything at it and swarm on it when you can, or something else?
Yeah, I think those are probably the only deadlines we get at Starling. Apart from that, we try just to aim for next month, maybe, is a sensible go. With the regulatory things, we try to think backwards a little bit. So with the engineering manager, and kind of try to guesstimate how long it should take to build, and what engineering capacity do we have available, and or when will we get something available. But when we get closer to it, then we try and just have a couple stand-ups during the week, and it's mainly just 5 minutes. Where are we on the engineering things, and if with compliance and risk, what needs to be done, and I'll probably have a few meetings with those other teams, mainly the risk guys. That's usually what is happening, and try and keep that away and just let people know in stand up. But yeah, it's just kind of keeping everyone up to date more than anything else.
Yeah, I think I like from what Tosin said, and it's something I've read in the Basecamp book, Shape Up, and other articles as well. Like the idea of kind of fixed timescale, variable scope is definitely an interesting way to go about that as well, and start really slicing off stuff that isn't actually essential. And that time pressure can really help drive those conversations. There's a very complicated looking one here. How do you manage transition for a few large customers from enterprise instances to a multi-tenant SaaS, which is where you're trying to attract other customers too? What are the key items to keep in mind for prioritization? Whew. I don't know if any of you have to do that.
I got one that I think might be useful. I think, especially in B2B, you might have a new platform, new pricing, new whatever that you want to move customers over to. And I think one of the only things I've done that's worked is wrapping a shiny carrot inside of whatever it is that you want your customers to do. So you want this, okay, everyone's always been asking for feature A for the past year. Fine, we'll build feature A. But to get feature A, you got to go and, upgrade to the new thing, move to the new plan, whatever. So that's one way to just sweeten the deal. And then another thing I've used when we built a new version of a feature, and enterprise customers are typically slower to adopt and they don't want change. One of the things we did is we sort of inverted how we launched it, and we started trying to build FOMO in our customers, and we would put up these updates that are like, oh, this new thing's coming out, it's really cool, but you can't get it yet. You have to wait for whatever date to get it. And then we started getting inbound requests from our enterprise customers who were like, wait, that thing looks cool. Can I have it? Versus, trying to force them over. So there's other tricks you can use to get people on board, but I don't think that there's any silver bullet on that one, at least in my experience.
I think there's a certain element from a commercial perspective as well of grandfathering and stuff, to make sure that they get some sweetener deal to get them across, even so that you're not looking like you're just trying to upsell them or something as well. How to maintain a prioritized strategy for tackling bugs. This goes back to the portfolio thing, I think. So, prioritized strategy for tackling bugs, backlogs, and product features. Is it advisable to have a mixed sprint or focus sprints for bugs and features separate?
I would just talk about some of what we do. So similar to what Giorgio mentioned, if there is a critical bug, it is addressed straight away. Like, we work when the games are on, so it is addressed. But if it's a bug and it's like, it's just, you can still use the product, we tend to backlog that, and then at probably towards the end of a season or mid-season or Christmas time is a great time to actually just dedicate 2-week sprint to just tech debt. We just tackle tech debt and engineering quality. So we don't do any product features, we don't do any campaigns, nothing. It's just, let's just tackle that. So we tend to do that every 3 months or so for the less critical bugs. But the ones that are critical, it's just addressed straight away. And so I guess to answer the question, we kind of do have mixed focus sprints. They're not sprints that are just focused on one particular feature. We can't really afford to do that. But we tend to do pods of engineers that can work on certain things simultaneously.
And Giorgio, you said your team's pretty small, so I imagine you don't have the flexibility to just throw bunches of developers at different themes and it all gets handled by the same team. Is that fair to say, or am I way off?
Yeah, no, most of the time it's the same team handling it. So we sort of have verticals. So we have like a customer service sort of team, a account management team. So it's not always the same engineers, but it's always the same team. These things.
So there's another question about Vice, which I think we've kind of covered, that we don't really seem to like that much, which maybe we can answer offline. But there's an interesting one here, and actually interested in your feedback on this, Giorgio, is how to get rid of the me as a user bias. Now, again, if we go back to all of your banking background people and the fact that they've been in and around banks for God knows how long, and assuming that they just know exactly what is needed because they've been in that industry for a while, how do you push back against that?
Yeah, so there's a few things to that. I think some of the older people think, okay, so one of the challenges Starling has, and a lot of these challenger banks, is how do you convince someone who banks with their high street bank like Barclays or NatWest and HSBC to leave their bricks and mortar branch and go to an app-based phone. So different people think, okay, credit cards, we have to match all the feature set from the other ones. You then get some users who think it's all about the app itself and think, well, as a user, I would like this color in the app instead. And you get to more trivial kind of questions, more like less important questions around why are people coming to the bank in the first place? So what we really try and do is just do a lot of user interviews and user tests when possible. I hate when I hear in the team, oh, well, I want this, or I think this. It's, can you back this up with data, or can you get 3, 4, 5 users that you've spoken to and explain to me why this is actually important? And then there's the whole question of, okay, there's the time versus getting that. We try and do a couple interviews every single week with customers. So we'll try and bring it up, or we'll jump into someone else's interview and we'll ask those questions. But a user test, we've started using them in the past year or so. And you can actually just get a wireframe kind of thing up in 5 minutes and just understand, as a usability problem, or is there any issue here? So we really just try to separate ourselves out of that equation and let other people make that decision.
And Maggie and Tosin, either of you, do you also get to do a lot of direct customer discovery, or are you limited in that? I mean, Maggie, obviously you've got a CS team, you've got enterprise account managers. They could, in some companies, be considered gatekeepers. Tosin, obviously you've got billions, maybe not billions, but you've certainly got a large number of users that you probably don't want to go and speak to every single individual one of them. But do you get to speak to any question to either of you?
Well, yes, I do. I don't personally do it myself. We have a user research team, and we're blessed to have different users across the world. So if I want to know what users in India think or users in London think, I can organize that and get that information. So we have enough access. We probably have too much access because users always want 101 things. So we're never shy of that.
Yeah,
Maggie, you were kind of nodding along a bit there. So about the enterprise thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, we also have a chat tool, so our customers can chat directly into our team. And a lot of times, especially in the early days, the product team did customer support shifts. So I have a series of customers who know my email, know who I am, and let me know whenever they want something, which is cool. But our PMs talk to customers minimum once a week. Like, everyone should always be talking to customers. And like, I did a roadmap conversation this morning with a customer. So I think it's really important for us to be doing that consistently, and not just getting, I think, especially in the stage I'm at in my career, like, not just getting usability feedback on an idea, but also I spend a lot of time doing generative research with customers. So maybe a PM would be looking at like, hey, is this solution the right one for the problem? What I spend most of my time doing is like, where are you going? What are your goals? Meeting with a marketer, like, what are your goals for this year? What are you trying to get done? Like, what are the campaigns you want to run? I'm just trying to understand more about what they're up to. That's the type of research that I find myself doing. But I think you just got to put yourself out there and keep consistent with it, because it's so important.
100% agree. And I think it's a typical feature factory discussion when you start thinking about just the salespeople coming to you and just giving you a list of things, or ranking every feature in reverse order by the date of the contract that is going to be renewed off the back of it or whatever. So that starts to become a very different discussion.
Yeah, we also use a tool called Gong. I think there's similar ones. So, and this is very B2B, but if a salesperson comes to us and they say, hey, we've heard this feature request, it's like, amazing, share the link of the call with me and I'll listen to it. So let me get that quote directly from the customer is one thing that I think is really helpful to do in that situation.
Oh, absolutely. I'm running slightly low on time, so we might not get all the questions, but I'm assuming that we can maybe share them around afterwards, Heather, or put them in the Slack channel, or send them out by email or LinkedIn or whatnot. But an interesting one here: how do you handle requests for post MVP valuable / wanted features versus MVP for the next thing? Are you ever in danger of only ever doing MVPs for everything? Open question.
Yes, you can absolutely fall into the trap of doing MVPs for everything. I think we were in that trap in early days. It's really hard to move from a motion of doing MVPs to doing like legitimate grown-up versions of whatever it is, because what I've learned is we needed to change our process and how we think about things and how we test things and how we do research. And I think also like how well we prioritize, because you can't do as many things if you want to do them well with the same size team. So I don't think I have the answer on that, but you can absolutely get stuck there, and you have to recognize like when you've done enough and when is it time to like say no and invest. I don't know if anyone else has figured out how to do that well.
Yeah, I would agree that you can, especially in a larger company where you have a lot of resources and a lot of sexy movement always happening, you can very much get in the sense of just doing MVPs, launching new things, and never really honing in on like iterating on it. And I have a very big crime about this. So I tend to be the PM that's like, hey, I launched this last year, but I'm going to keep working on it. It's going in the roadmap. And just as you mentioned, Jason, be super explicit about what you're building and why. So yes, we have strategic bets, but we should also preserve, or at least, honor what we did build last time so that we can build upon it and see what actually happens. And so I guess going back to the question of mixed sprints, not everything is net new. That is one thing I don't like to do in sprints, not have every ticket be a net new thing. Some things have to be like the V2. We don't just say we're going to do a V2. Let's actually do the V2. So I tend to try and not do that. And if it's something that is an MVP and it just didn't work, let's just drop it. We don't need to create another MVP to replace that one. We don't need to do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So Heather, we're 1 minute before time. I guess we'll need to finish pretty soon. I don't know if we'll be able to share these questions around, or if, I mean, I'm happy, for example, to pop onto the Slack channel and give my opinion on anything we didn't answer. And I'm sure some of the others can join in too, if that's a good way forward.
Yeah, sounds great. What I can do is I can pull this transcript and drop some of these questions in, and I'll tag you all. And then, you know, in your own time, you can answer the questions. And if anyone in the audience has any more, feel free to check out the Slack and over the next few days, and the speakers will be able to add some of their thoughts and opinions.
Excellent. I'm sure everyone will be delighted to be added on LinkedIn as well if you want to connect with them as well. So, it's been really interesting to have a brief tour. It went very quickly, actually. I'm hoping that there's some interesting nuggets for everyone listening. And thanks, obviously, to Georgia, Maggie, and Tosin for taking the time, and for Heather for putting it on. And let's all keep in touch and keep prioritizing.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Thanks, Jason, for expertly steering the conversation. Great job. And thanks to all the audience questions and, of course, our fantastic panelists. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much.
Here's all.